Hey everyone, thank you for joining. Um, Welcome to one of Vercel's virtual sessions. We're going to talk about Next.js and e-commerce and how they actually pair really nicely together and help in all parts of both the delivery and the developer experience. And I will attempt to control the slides. But just some quick introductions. My name is Miguel. I'm a sales engineer at Vercel. I work with the customers on all the different products that we have, including things like V0, Next.js, and Vercel, our core platform. Um, and yeah, I've been at the company since October and have just been using these tools for about the last 10 years or so of my career. Yeah,
Awesome. Nice to meet you guys. My name is Thomas. I'm also a sales engineer here at Vercel. I've been here for about 5 months now. Before this, I was at Datadog and been a power user of Next.js and Vercel for quite a while now. So really excited to talk to you guys about e-commerce and Next.js.
awesome. So breaking down what we're going to kind of talk about today, we're going to introduce Next.js for those who aren't familiar. We're just going to talk very quickly about the framework and some of the big components and pieces around it. We're also going to talk about how it plays with e-commerce and some of the major wins that you can get for for a low amount of effort. And then we're going to talk about the idea of how do you kind of make this case of composability? How do you actually talk about how does Next.js play into your e-commerce stack and what benefits it might have? And then we'll also talk about Next.js with Vercel. Vercel itself is actually the owner of the framework. We're the main contributors. Our core team works here at Vercel. And we're also able to use Next.js within Vercel as a first party citizen to be able to bring all of the main performance benefits of Next.js into our managed infrastructure. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll open things up later to answering some of the questions that might come in. So feel free to use the Q&A feature in Zoom, put your questions in there. We'll answer them all towards the end, just so we can make sure we keep time and keep to the agenda. But I'll keep an eye on it as well as Thomas, and we'll come back to it. All right, jumping ahead. So just a quick poll that is going to come out is just kind of more for my sake, out of curiosity, but I'd like to know like what people are using to kind of build their e-commerce applications right now. Um, Anything and everything that you want to share, if it's just the front end part, if it's both parts of the stack. I just like to see kind of like what tooling is available right now and what people are using, what people have rewritten stuff to anything new versus what people are still using some of the older technologies. It just kind of helps with some of the discussion. But I'll leave the poll up for a little bit and we can keep going along. And we are going to talk about Next.js.
Perfect. So the React framework for retailers. Next.js is pretty much the go-to React framework for some of the largest retailers in the world, companies like Nike, Target, Ticketmaster, New Balance. They're all using Next.js to build really fast, modern experiences. And you might ask why, right? And it's really because Next.js offers a comprehensive tool set tailored for the demands of modern e-commerce. So whether it's speed, scalability, flexibility, right? If you're launching a global storefront or just optimizing core web vitals, Next.js is going to be the best tool for the job. Today, Next.js is considered almost like the de facto standard for creating new React apps. It's open source, backed by a vibrant community. It's earned over 131,000 stars on GitHub. And what really sets us apart is that rich ecosystem, right? From building monitoring tools, built-in monitoring tools to maintain top performance, or just using our robust managed infrastructure that you can hook in with Vercel. So with Next.js, you're not just building an app, right? You're building on a platform that's designed to scale, perform, and adapt to the future of the web. All right, so let's dive into some of the key benefits of using Next.js for e-commerce. First up is going to be some of those strategic rendering patterns. Next.js is going to give you powerful options like static site generation, server-side rendering, incremental static regeneration, partial pre-rendering, and of course, client-side rendering. It's all designed to deliver blazingly fast pages that are dynamic. And this flexibility allows you guys to choose really the best rendering strategy for each part of your site. Next.js is also built for experimentation and personalization. with support for A/B testing via middleware, feature flags, and our multiple different types of SDKs. You can easily test and control different user experiences. Combine that with all the different rendering methods I mentioned before, and you pretty much have everything you need to iterate quickly and confidently. Which brings us to the next point, helping teams ship fast. Our CTO Malta commonly says that iteration velocity is the solution to all known technical problems. So it's not just about building a fast site, it's about how can we maintain it, scale it, and evolve it over time. And we want to make sure that your sites are fast without compromising that iteration velocity. And finally, we'll talk about Vercel, the platform built to supercharge your Next.js apps. This is where we'll introduce the concept of framework-defined infrastructure and how Next.js pretty much has baked-in knowledge of how Vercel should scale and deploy your apps. This means as you write your code, you're implicitly defining the infrastructure behavior without needing to manually configure it all. Awesome. So let's get into some of these rendering strategies. This diagram here is a recipe I like to use to create blazingly fast pages, right? So the first of which is going to be caching static parts of your site, whether it's a product PDP page or a PLP page. And with that, you can start to add streaming with partial pre-rendering. So you can start to immediately show the user your product page while streaming in the dynamic parts of your site, as you guys can see here with the recommendations or the reviews. And if you combine this with prefetching to make that initial load of the static content even faster, you essentially have the recipe to create a super fast experience for your users. And we'll get into some of these rendering strategies in the following slides, but wanted to quickly show you guys that these primitives are built out of the box with Next.js. Now, nowhere is page speed more important than e-commerce, right? Amazon found that like every 100 milliseconds of added page time translates to about 1% decrease in sales. So we want to make sure that you guys have the fastest e-commerce experiences, and we believe Next.js is the best tool to do so. So let's go ahead and talk about some of these rendering strategies.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're going to talk about essentially different ways to deliver your content to your users, right? So people are building apps in so many different ways. We have different ways of delivering that content to our clients, right? So one of the classic ways that we're seeing, and it was kind of a big boom in the last few years, is that idea of static site generation. So this could be a tool like Gatsby, or even just a regular, Vite or other JavaScript, front end type tooling to essentially build some sort of static content, HTML pages, all the bundled JavaScript, and those things essentially run through your build process. They're easily cacheable. The idea is that you can put those very close to your users. The odd part about it is that like your SEO can vary, because if you use things like a blog or your privacy policies or terms and conditions, things that actually have content that will always be available, then that stuff will be baked into the page. That's stuff that can be indexed by Google and other search engines. But if you have something that's like a highly dynamic application, maybe introduces things like feature flagging or personalization, that stuff usually needs to hydrate into the experience after the page load, and SEO can be impacted in those kind of ways. The other part that's kind of the gotcha to static site generation is that the page changes need to be redeployed. So if you made changes to a blog and those page contents have changed, in theory you need a new deployment and a new release. But again, the main benefits of static site generation is that you're able to make them and deliver them very quickly. And then, as I'm jumping around from screen to screen here, we can jump into the opposite side of static, which is server-side rendering, which I realize I have the wrong acronym, SSG. It should be SSR. But this is kind of the opposite side of things, which is you're leveraging the server to handle that content to be built for you. This is, I call it personalization at its core. This is where you can let the server, right, do all the components that it needs to gather all those pieces and generate those experiences for your users every time that they request it. It's dynamic to the max is my next point. And this can be really good for SEO, because This allows your content to react in real time to changes in your data, changes in your flags, um, content changes, authorization changes, and that allows all that stuff to happen before it gets delivered to the client, which means that SEO can parse it, it can index it, and it's able to be more efficiently searchable in search engines. But with that, you come into kind of some really odd caching constraints, right? If you have a super personalized page, you don't necessarily want that to be the thing that gets read and indexed because that might not be the universal experience for every user, right? So that's where we get into the next strategy that we have, which is incremental static regeneration. And this might be something that gets introduced for when you have something that needs to be a runtime based generation. So things like a checkout page or things like maybe a product page that has user reviews and you want to be able to update those with live user reviews, price changes. I come from my previous experience. I ran two different fast food company web teams and the product pages with the menus. Um, all that kind of stuff is stuff that needs to come from data, right? From external sources, but it's something that either needs to change on demand or it doesn't, right? And I mean that as it has to be able to do both. So the idea of incremental static regeneration is the our mantra for it is the power of SSR, but the speed of static. And so what happens is when a page gets requested in Next.js, it'll actually run through the server pass. It'll get all the data, it'll grab the menu, and it'll build that page for you. But where Next.js gets it to the next level is that you can actually control that level of caching on based on tags or on time. So what I mean by that is that you can tell a page that is incrementally regenerated to say, hey, I want you to cache this for 15 minutes. And after 15 minutes is up, the next time somebody requests that page, I want you to rebuild this page again. But within that 15-minute window, used that cache version. So that's very typical with how we see, modern types of caching that exist right now. But where things get more granular is you're able to attach these tags to them where you don't actually have to flush your entire cache all of the time. Now you can actually tie individual caches to individual pages and say, all right, in 15 minutes, bust this cache and deliver a new page. Or if somebody places this order and then inventory goes to zero, flush this individual page, and the next person that goes to this page will then rebuild that page and it will be cached for the next event. So you kind of have this ability to control the caching through the events of your application with the idea of tags. And moving on to a case study. So one of the customers that I work with is Helly Hansen, and they're an outdoor clothing and gear company. It's actually a lot of my peers actually say it's the best brand for like ski wear, or at least that's what I don't ski. You will not see me skiing, but that is at least what I've been told. But they rely heavily on this idea of ISR. And there's a few benefits to it. So again, when data isn't changing often, you're actually able to offload the idea of building all these static pages on demand. And what that means is you'll be able to generate them from the server, right? And then leverage our ISR strategies to cache them. So for the hundreds or thousands of products that exist in their store and all the different ways that their pages can be built through experimentation, they can actually leverage ISR to build and cache those pages to where your server isn't being so heavily used. So you get those cost benefits, but then also you can control independently when those caches need to be busted. And that's kind of like the big win for a really large e-commerce place where you might have things like the PLP, the PDP, checkout flows, user profile pages, user reviews, any types of order history where you can take those experiences and cache them for those individual users. Because again, tags can actually be mapped to any piece of data of that original page. So if it's tied to a user, tied to individual cookies, tied to feature flags, experimentation, it's extremely dynamic. The other features that Helly Hansen also lean into are things like our image asset optimizations. So Next.js has primitives that we'll talk about a little bit more later that where you can actually connect to pieces like your digital asset managers, your CMS platforms, and be able to bring those images in and transform them so that the way they're optimized. And then they also use things like our middleware for geolocation lookups. We have in our Vercel platform, we have the ability to actually get request information about where the request is coming from. So they can use that for things like internationalization, language translations, region redirecting, all those types of different features that are baked into the framework. And then also the main reason why all this is important is as it drives a good user experience. It drives a fast user experience. So this CWV, this core web vitals that we talk about at Vercel, is the idea is how well is it working for your users? And with all of these different strategies and more that are baked into the framework itself, we see about an average score for them around 96 out of 100, which is vastly, an improvement for where we were starting from when we were migrating with them. The other part that was interesting too is that they migrated less than a year. I forget the number of months, but the whole plan, like they were able to rewrite and move everything into Next.js in under a year. All right. I am going to pass it back to Thomas.
All right. So let's talk about partial pre-rendering. This is one of the most exciting advancements in Next.js. You can kind of think of it as the best of both worlds, right? You get that ultra fast delivery of static content at the edge, but it's also going to be combined with the flexibility and power of dynamic rendering, all without adding complexity to your code base. So essentially how it works is during the build process, Next.js pre-renders as much of the page as possible, just like static site generation. So things like your layout, navigation, images, other static elements are going to be instantaneously available to the user. But when Next.js encounters dynamic components like a personalized recommendation section, pricing, or the shopping cart, those are going to be wrapped in a React suspense boundary. And that is how we're going to identify what is dynamic and what needs to be kind of streamed in with PPR. So that static shell is essentially going to be delivered to the user immediately, reducing that time to first byte, making that experience feel snappy. And then within that same request, the dynamic components are going to be streamed in. So the user starts seeing content instantaneously while the rest loads in progressively. And this approach gives us the performance of static delivery with the flexibility of dynamic rendering. And of course, you can kind of do this with client-side rendering, but it's going to include a couple round trips, right? And the whole point of PPR is to kind of minimize the complexity that's required to get dynamic and static content within the same request. So the best part of this is that you guys can actually try it out today. We have some customers using partial pre-rendering in production. It is still, not fully GA per se, but you can go ahead and test it out within our Canary branches. And it's a really powerful step forward, bringing the best parts, again, of static and dynamic rendering. So one of our customers using partial pre-rendering in production is Made in Cookware. They specialize in high quality cookware and they rely on Next.js for their front end. And essentially with incremental static regeneration, they update static pages on the fly without having to rebuild the whole site. And they also leverage the Vercel Edge network so that their product listing pages and product detail pages load instantaneously, right? And then from there, they actually use PPR for the dynamic parts, right? So in this GIF here, you'll see that I'm adding something to the cart. And once I do, I'll essentially refresh the page. What you guys will see is that little icon on the top right indicating what's in my cart is streamed in, right? So within that first request, we're going to go ahead and give you the product detail page, but then those dynamic parts like what's in the cart are going to stream in as that request is fulfilled. So despite having a really, really small engineering team, Maiden is currently like 3 developers. They've essentially been able to rapidly scale and keep their code base pretty lean. They're set up currently. Oh, yeah. So going to the next slide here. Yeah, let's jump on in. So the key benefits of Next.js for Made in Cookware, having talked to some of their engineers, is the developer velocity. So they mentioned how Next.js enables faster development because they have these high quality patterns for server-side experimentation. And what they're talking about here is how Next.js is really a full-featured framework, right? They have things like the Next.js middleware to run A/B tests. They also have feature flags through our Flags SDK. This allows them to gradually roll out new features with confidence while minimizing the risk to their core business. So let's go ahead and quickly talk about how we can bring your customers closer with personalization. Our goal is to help you guys deliver highly personalized, dynamic e-commerce experiences. And again, we mentioned the Flags SDK. That's one way to do it. You can easily manage and deploy feature flags, and that allows you to do controlled rollouts, A/B testing, experimentation. So you can validate some of those new ideas with confidence, all while kind of safeguarding your core user experience. Another powerful capability is the Next.js middleware. So middleware acts as a really lightweight routing layer that runs before the rendering of your actual pages. It's a perfect place to introduce things like real-time personalization, right? Such as redirecting 50% of your users to a new version of the page, or testing different PDP layouts to observe behavior. And again, you can kind of gather insights without having to do full redeploys. And all of this is further enhanced with React Server components, which are fully supported in Next.js. And it allows you to get that seamless dynamic user experience without having to add too much complexity to your code base. So one cool example here is that with Logitech, once they moved to Next.js, they actually experienced a 40% increase in conversions. So kind of piecing all these different features in Next.js together, they were able to create a really, really compelling experience for their users that results in real conversions. All right, so with SEO, at Vercel, we help customers every single day kind of improve their SEO, and it's really, again, thanks to the power of Next.js having all the tools necessary. So as we mentioned before, Next.js gives you some of those different rendering strategies out of the box, like static generation, server-side rendering, and ISR, to make your sites fast, responsive, and easily crawlable by those search engines. But it's not just about traditional SEO anymore. In today's landscape, large language models like ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, they're also parsing and referencing your content. And that means your metadata and structure need to be accessible not only to humans, but to these LLMs. If someone searches for a red t-shirt, you want to make sure that those systems can easily recognize and surface your sites. So we'll start with ISR to keep your pages lightning fast while still adding some dynamic components. And then we'll move into other page optimizations like image optimization, font optimization, and reducing layout shifts. And then from there, we'll dive into the technical SEO, like injecting dynamic metadata. And this is something that traditional client-side rendering struggles with, right? With Next.js, each one of your pages, whether it's a product listing page or a detail page, it's going to have that unique metadata, and it makes it much easier for these search engines to know exactly what they're indexing, and it helps your users find exactly what they're looking for. And last but not least, Next.js also supports localization and internationalization out of the box. So if you guys want to expand to new markets, new regions, you can easily start to reroute users based off their language preferences in their browser to serve like translated content for whatever location they're requesting from.
Coming off mute. So we're going to talk about just some of the few key features that I like to identify about Next.js that kind of just help with the overall flow of development experience. So the idea of Next is that it's supposed to be a place for you to be able to work quickly and efficiently with a lot of tools that relate to all parts of e-commerce and just general applications in general. Yeah, we'll pretend I didn't say general twice, but intelligent bundling is definitely the first thing I like to bring. So when you're dealing with something like the server and the client, Next.js actually tears apart your application to parts that need to go to the client because they run in the browser versus the stuff that executes on the server. You're allowed to share a code between those two things, but you just develop, you just build, and it will handle that bundling process for you. The other part that really ties into that is because we're actually, we pair closely with the React team, is that we get to use the latest and greatest features that come out of React, like the new React 19 release. We have the use hook. There's the view transition stuff that's coming out. There's going to be the activity stuff that's coming out as well. A lot of those features will be experimentally available in Next.js pretty early on, which is awesome for being able to build more, exciting experiences for your users. I know I did mention the image optimizations. We do have our image tag that's available as a component in Next.js, and that will strategically optimize and transform your images. So that way, in my background, I have my camera equipment. I do photography to where my site is able to take something like my 40 megapixel camera and images and be able to shrink those down into web consumable or mobile consumable sizes. I don't have to build my own proxy layer. I don't have to build my own caching strategy. All I need is a place for them to live, and Next.js can tie into those directly. Then we also the big features that I like to talk about are the caching mechanics that we have. So use cache is one of our directives that's going to be coming in our later Next.js builds, but you can use it currently as experimental features in Canary. We do have currently stable versions of these types of caching paradigms that you can use. More than happy to talk about those later as well. We do also use server actions, which are also server functions. They're the same name in case you're finding those in the React documentation as well. And that allows you to kind of write the idea of like on-demand API type of requests where you have a form that's being submitted and you don't want to have to stand up like a separate REST endpoint, but you want to communicate back to your server. You can use server actions to kind of do that communication. And then we also have our Next.js middleware, which allows you to really dive into certain things like rewrites and redirects. You can also do header adjustments. So if you want to add custom headers, you can do cookie setting, internationalization. There's a whole bunch of stuff. I've mingled the middleware a bunch of times, but there's a lot of flexibility it provides into delivering unique experiences as well as working towards new features.
Mhm. So, we talked about how Next.js definitely helps uh, get your sites and pages a lot faster, but it also helps with developer velocity, right? It's packed with features that help teams build and ship faster without getting bogged down by setup or complexity. And first off, right, we want to talk about some of those streamlined developer experience pieces with file-based routing, hot module replacement, built-in TypeScript support. New developers can hit the ground running, and there's no need to wrestle with some of these configurations or boilerplate code to get started. And another really good point is the all-in-one architecture, right? So things like API routes, server components, middleware, it's all kind of baked in. And that means less reliance on external backend services and a much more easier deployment pipeline. One code base, one framework, kind of end to end. And Next.js also gives you performance out of the box, right? So caching, streaming, image, font optimization, code splitting, all of that is going to be available to you without additional setup. So you can get those lightning fast storefronts without spending weeks optimizing performance manually. And it also encourages experimentation. So as you guys have seen with Made in Cookware, it's crucial to iterate fast, and built-in support for A/B tests, feature flags, and easy access to things like headers and cookies gives teams like full control for request handling. And that makes it really easy to kind of test and tweak as your traffic is coming in. And for e-commerce, we've got you covered. We have ready-made solutions like component libraries, platform connectors. We have some community templates to help you guys skip the grunt work and also start to see what Next.js might look like for your e-commerce business. And lastly, you're not going to be building in a vacuum. The Next.js ecosystem is huge and it's thriving. We have UI libraries like ShadCN and the entire broader React ecosystem that are well supported, widely adopted, and constantly evolving, which means that you're building, again, on that solid, future-proof foundation.
Awesome. So Next.js has the ability to kind of really tie to the idea of e-commerce and delivering the right experience for your user depending on the business needs that you need at that given page. Malta, our CTO, he published a blog post at the beginning of the month talking about the idea of composability and e-commerce and essentially how to approach it. And the few takeaways that I like to bring up is keep your scope focused. So focus on the things that you want, what you're trying to do. It could be front end, it could be back end. or it could be some sort of integration feature where you want more visibility into what your customers are doing online. And with that, you can lower the risk. So keep your monolith. If you have something that's existing, if you have something that's currently in play, we're not saying gut the whole thing and replace it. You can actually build a separate Next.js application on top of it, and that will help lower the risk. You don't have to worry about trying to refactor something that's internally in your application for the next generation of stuff. You can work auxiliary to it and have, essentially a dedicated velocity, a dedicated scope. That's all entirely upon the new a new Next.js platform. The other part is that it doesn't impact anything, right? When you introduce a composable architecture, the idea, right, is that things can be in isolation. They can be developed and maintained independently. There's obviously a relationship to it, and teams need to communicate and coordinate. But the idea is that you can work on the front end without having to worry about a back end release and vice versa. Now, you don't want to sacrifice quality. You obviously want to make sure that what you're building is comfortable and that you're supported. And that's the whole idea of being able to do incremental adoption and only work towards the main goals of your business first, and then be able to broaden it out. I've seen this where people introduce Next app for like the core ordering experience of e-commerce, and they leave the main pieces of their other main site still as the other architecture, and then they slowly adopt more of Next.js. I've also seen is complete rewrites where they start from the ground up and then do either A/B testing or split traffic or eventually a full cutover. And in the end, really the main thing is that everyone's situation is different. Everyone's coming with their own, constraints, their own history, tech challenges, everything. I know that I'm not talking to a bunch of greenfield projects that are starting from scratch. So we have people here. Our community has people to talk through these things. That's something that I personally do as well with the community. So feel free to get engaged, have those conversations, and learn and see what other people are doing, because it's a great way to just kind of build that kind of architecture together. All right. And then this is my fun shameless plug of like, how do you get started? Where do you go from here? So we have our documentation. The link that I have right here, and we'll share all these after the talk as well, is nextjs.org/learn. It's our first phase of our learning platform, learning the concepts of Next.js, the main important concepts that we have, the page rendering strategies, etc. It's really good for onboarding new people that are getting into Next.js. Also, it helps people who are not familiar with how Next.js is different than other traditional frameworks. Obviously, if you're a developer, NPX, go for it. Start a new application on your local machine, get started, tinker around, get connected. We do have a Discord channel. We do have places that you guys can get involved with community members, as well as some of us who volunteer to be in there. And then we also have v0.dev. So we haven't mentioned that. I intentionally tried to keep that out of this, but we do have an AI tool that's available. It is a site that you can go to, and you can actually ask it questions about our documentation, about our platform, and you can get these same types of questions, things around PPR, ISR, use client versus use server, even some of the use cache stuff that's coming out as well. And then finally, feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. I'm a social butterfly. I like engaging the community, so I'm always around. But there are specific members that also work at Vercel that are to manage the community and get engaged in those types of things. And then I'm always around also for deeper discussions if you want to talk about using Next.js in your e-commerce platform. And I'm going to pass it to Thomas to talk just very briefly around Vercel itself, and then we'll wrap it up for Q&A.
Perfect. So that brings us to Vercel, the front-end cloud. And yeah, just to give you guys a quick overview of what Vercel is, if you haven't heard of us, it's the cloud-based ecosystem specifically designed for front-end engineers to build, deploy, and scale high-quality web applications. So you can essentially think of it as like a comprehensive suite of cloud-native tools, from global infrastructure to powerful development, giving you guys the best tools to give the best web experiences for your users. And unlike traditional deployments, right, you don't have to deal with backend infra or scaling issues, load balancing, or DevOps complexity. Vercel's front-end cloud allows you to kind of focus your time on your company's digital front door. So it's kind of broken up into two parts that we'll talk about here, the developer experience platform, and it's, again, that complete toolkit designed to help streamline developer workflows. So it has things like instant automated deployments, real-time collaboration, full visibility into performance and changes, and it really helps you guys iterate faster than ever. The second part of this is that managed infrastructure. We're built on a serverless foundation. So our infrastructure handles everything from auto scaling to provisioning for global CDN delivery. So you guys don't have to build that in AWS or any cloud service yourself. And essentially, right, you don't have to worry about scale. All you have to worry about is that front end experience and the performance of your web apps.
Awesome. So I also am throwing another poll up there just for anyone who is interested in getting more hands-on with Vercel's infrastructure and how it pairs with Next.js, learning more about what we do and kind of the stuff that's available. So feel free, take some time to answer that poll. But that's everything. Congrats, you guys survived. We have a few common links here that might be useful for you guys. These are just QR codes that you're more than welcome to scan. The first one is our commerce template. So it's something that we maintain. It's more of a modern take of how to approach starting off in commerce. It's more of a full solution. So we tie, I believe, to I think that one is for towards a Shopify type of starter template, but you can definitely take it and branch it into those different plugins as you see fit. I've seen it used in many ways. The middle link is the Malta's blog post that I was talking about, which is just kind of like learning about how introducing composable architecture to commerce doesn't actually have to be as scary as it sounds. You can always start small and incrementally work your way and staying focused on your expectations and working with tools that can help you iterate and deliver fast. And then we also have another QR code that is just a general exploring our composable commerce with Vercel in general. We have a plethora of customers that are using us for their commerce platform, and there's a lot that goes along with it. But yeah, so I think we have reached our conclusion, and now we can kind of take a look at some of the questions that have come up. I will probably do these more answered live. And Thomas, if you have any, feel free to kind of talk over me on any of them. So the quick answers I'll answer. So I do see a few questions around, is PPR stable? So PPR formally is not a stable feature in Next.js. We are working on trying to have that wrapped up for this year. It is something that you can experimentally enable. Us at Vercel, we tend to dog food it a lot and use it a lot so that we can expose those things, so that way the team can address those. But it doesn't mean that you can't experiment with it now. For anyone who's using a Next.js application, what I actually recommend to do is separate a branch from your main branch and then enable that feature and have that essentially always sync with your release cycle. And then as you see things break or change or whatnot, you'll have those real time as you're working in your normal sprint life versus like waiting to the end to like, all right, can we do it now? It'll help you with that journey. So let's see, there's that one. Awesome. And then yeah, I'm pretending like I know how the Q&A stuff works here. Let's see. Is there a good Next.js storefront template working with Magento? So we have a lot of community templates to kind of get you going. It depends on your type of integration with Magento that you're looking for. A lot of that kind of stuff is going to come to a general implementation of talking to Magento from a headless standpoint. I don't think we have a community template that directly talks to Magento, but I will get a more thorough answer from our internal team and see if I have something that I can share with you guys. So that is a good question. Let me look because I see other ones coming in as well. Oh, I see the does Diet Dr. Pepper taste more like regular Dr. Pepper? It's a good question. I
I
would
would say no. I would say no. Yeah, it's definitely
I like
different.
it. Um, I'm a Coke and Pepsi fan. So I do see, is it safe to use fluid computing? So that is a feature that we have in Vercel that allows us to essentially reuse a Lambda for its fullest potential. It's a software layer that we have on top of the idea of a Lambda infrastructure. And yes, it is safe to use. There are some things you want to make sure you're like prepared for, and we have documentation around that. But we have many customers that are opting into it. I believe we're even changing it to be more default as an option for you. And there's going to be a lot of cost benefits of using something like that because it's going to lower the runtime of your, or it's going to use more of the runtime of an individual Lambda invocation, which will save you cost of spinning up new Lambdas. So that is a good question. Let me see what other ones we have. I see. Is it possible to make cryptocurrency exchange apps using Next.js? Anything is possible in the web. That's the easy answer. We do have customers in that space that are on Next.js in Vercel. So yes, I will say it's possible. And then let me see. Ways for conditional rendering in Next.js when desktop and mobile designs are different. Are there different ways to avoid big HTML documents? There are a few good ways to go about this. So keep in mind that the server is not going to necessarily know what, like you can look at like a user agent and change the way if you really wanted to. There are tools that you could probably ingest in the middleware and have more device specific metrics that you could choose how you return the page. Um, a lot of times than not, I tend to coach design teams to work towards a general layout and it's more of a responsive question than it is how to actually handle that in Next.js. Um, but I do understand where you're getting at with the idea of like, here's my desktop stuff, and then here's my markup for my mobile stuff. It would very much depend on what you're trying to achieve. I'd be more than happy to try to talk about it more separately if you want to connect with me. But that is generally how we'd approach it is being able to kind of consume it and have metrics and make those decisions around those metrics at the page level or the layout or all the different parts of Next.js. But that is a good question. I'm like rapid firing these things. I'm sorry. Oh, this is a good one. So how do you recommend doing performance optimizations in Next.js? What are things that need to be avoided and cautious when doing Next.js and web development? So the one thing that I will tell you guys is that with the idea of server components, it's going to be really important where you're actually fetching your data. So typically in like regular frameworks, and I know we're pretty much at time too, but I'll talk for an extra minute. Typically in frameworks, you tend to get the content, you render the page, you send it to the user. In Next.js, as we talked about the partial pre-rendering, you can actually manage most of your static shell of your application to where you're only fetching that data in those components that need to be dynamic. There's multiple ways of doing it, and I'm actually in progress of working on some stuff that will either be a blog post or a repository that's available to kind of help demo some of that stuff. But the main recommendation is keep your data fetching closer to where that render actually happens. The higher you have it in your pages or your layouts, the more blocking you become in that render cycle, and that will impact your performance. All right, I've got time for maybe one or two more. Is it recommended to work with server actions in the flow of a client's cart? You can definitely use server actions because again, the idea is that they're made to be communications back to the server and then respond. So yes, you can definitely do it. It very much depends on, I think, your implementation of what the cart does. So my previous like fast food restaurant that I may have worked at, it was essentially a server action back to Next.js, which then talked to other platforms. So there were certain things that I had to circularly work back to the client. So there was a little bit of like polling that had to go on top of that, but the main mutations were able to be server actions. So yes, you could totally do that. All right, I'll do one more if I can find one here.
This is a good question here about
Go for it.
e-commerce websites that have been developed using V0. If you guys have seen V0 before, it's essentially Vercel's web design tool that's fully powered by AI. So you can use natural language to create and prototype any type of website you guys want. Definitely check it out if you guys haven't seen it already. But yeah, we see a lot of customers using V0 for really any type of site prototyping. And then from there, they'll take it to their IDEs or continue to work with front-end engineers to build it out. But e-commerce sites with V0, that's a great use case. V0 is going to be trained on all the knowledge to make the most out of ISR, PPR, and all those different Next features. So that's definitely a great way of developing e-commerce as well.
Awesome. Yeah, sorry. I know there's more questions in here, but I know we're also at time. Um, yes, feel free. I will also go through the rest of the questions and try to have some better answers that we can follow up with. Feel free to connect with myself. I'm on LinkedIn and any of the social medias, but I appreciate you guys hanging around and getting to learn a little bit about Next.js, and would love to talk more if you guys are wanting to.